You know, descriptive analysis is described as the most sophisticated tool currently available to measure human perception. And the application of these methods continues to grow across all different types of product categories. And there are 2 books out that if you don't have them in your library, you should consider getting them. And one of them just came out recently. It's Descriptive Analysis and Sensory Evaluation by Kemp, Horton, Hollywood, from Wiley Blackwell. It came out in 2018. And ASTM has Manual 13, a 2nd edition of descriptive methods that's coming out hopefully in the next 6 months or so. But you know, there are a lot of different methods out there. But one of the things we all talk about is how do you determine data quality from a trained panel? And we've seen many sensory professionals shy away from understanding really the panel performance metrics. I think it's important that you understand the insights gained, and the RedJade output. It provides very rich and actionable feedback for the sensory department. We're always talking about, you know, descriptive data provides feedback to the product developers. Well, the output file provides that same feedback to the sensory team to figure out how we make the research better. So I want to give just a brief history about panel performance measures, because the first time they were discussed was by Stone and Seidel when they were developing QDA at Stanford Research Institute, even before they formed Tragon Corporation. And it was their groundbreaking work in the 1960s and 70s where descriptive analysis really grew rapidly. And they started selling software. Tragon started selling software back in the 70s, developing algorithms and things to think about very specific analyses for descriptive data. And over the years, they upgraded it to include some plotting software, design software. All of these activities were really designed to gather, analyze, and report data on sensory. And one of Herb Stone's favorite quotes is, "The proof is in the booth." How do you collect data? And what he meant by that is you have to collect data in a scientific way, and then apply statistics to understand the variance. And hence the analysis of variance is really a workhorse, and you'll see that in the output file that Heather goes through. So most of the tests in the RedJade output file today are still based in the QDA method, but it also incorporates other industry experts' views with other descriptive methods. So as RedJade was developed, you know, they certainly met with other folks that are very well respected in their descriptive methods too. And part of the ways that we visualize the panel metrics which is where we are today. And I think that's good for the industry. It's good for all of us. So descriptive data has a lot of applications, and our role is really to minimize risks in decision making. When it starts being used in legal disputes and sensory claim substantiation, at some level, you can expect and you should be prepared for a high level of scrutiny on all aspects of your descriptive data. So with that, I'm proud to have worked with Heather at Tragon, and she is definitely our chief of data and analytics. Heather's looked at more descriptive data than anybody that I know, and it's just one of her areas of expertise, but a very important one for us and for all of us. And so I think with that, she's going to go through just descriptive data, how to get the most power out of it. And you know, we're just happy to be part of the conversation and be part of the discussion. So with that, I'll turn it over to Heather.
Yeah, actually, it'll be me real quick. Sorry. So this is Steve. I'm going to actually walk through this test really quickly to show how you would set this up in RedJade so that you can easily get the data that Heather is discussing as we walk through this. So the way this is going to go, I'm going to really quickly show this, 2 minutes tops. I'm going to hand it over to Heather to talk about the data, and then I'll take back control of the screen to show panel performance metrics over time and show how those are tracked as well in RedJade while Heather talks about it. So let's go ahead really quickly. I just created this descriptive analysis test. I'm just going to click edit and walk through a few key steps that you need in order to get this type of output in RedJade. Right, so a couple of things. One is we're collecting the data on site, which means we're going to collect data on computers that have been registered to RedJade. And you'll see here we have self-check-in. Self-check-in means that RedJade will identify who that individual is in the system, so it will automatically tie the data together. We're also going to automatically select on step 2, we're going to select the panel, and that will group that panel data together with that panel performance metric over time as well. So those are 2 key features there. I'm going to go to the last step, which is the design block, which is the other key feature here. And here you can see we have our 5 samples. And we've gone ahead and we've added 4 repetitions of data. So we recommend at least 2 repetitions of data. I will let Heather talk about that. But in order for RedJade to give you all of your panel performance metrics, you need to have at least 2 repetitions of data. And then here I've set up for 1 day per group, which just means that you will evaluate all 5 products on a given day, have a break before you evaluate the next 5 samples. That can be later in the day, it can be the next day, it can be a week from now, but that's a log in, log out session. And with that, Heather, I will let you go ahead and share your screen and talk through the data.
Okay. Cannot start screen share.
Let me stop my share. Now you should be able to.
Got it.
We did work on this before, so hopefully it works smoothly. Heather and I did do this. All right, there we go. That was good. All right.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Steve. So I'm very excited to share with you some of the insight on how to look at descriptive results and how panel performance measures really play a role in our decision making. And Steve has mentioned that there are several training videos and documents and located in the support site. And they give great overviews of the descriptive analysis and panel performance. One key document that I want to make sure I recommend is the RedJade panel performance metrics. This file, it contains the detailed summary of each of the metrics of the panel performance analysis that RedJade performs. So we're here today really to give you some insight on how to work through the output, how to determine what measures are most important, and how to go about determining next steps after you evaluate these individual subjects and the panel. So first of all, we want to make sure that you are working through the output in an efficient and productive way. It is a big output, so you want to make sure that you know where to even begin. So the workbook sheets are really laid out conveniently to review your product, your attribute, and your panel results. We recommend that you go from the leftmost sheet, the one that I'm on, the cover sheet here, all the way to the end and to the right, and to follow this progression for each of your projects. This order goes from the biggest overview on the left to the greatest detail on the right. And you'll find that if you follow this order, the beginning sheets will give you good summary results, and it will provide the clues about where you need to look deeper into the key details later in the file. Before we take the journey, though, through the sheets, I do want to point out the foundation of the RedJade descriptive analysis. And as Becky and Steve mentioned, the original QDA output was the cornerstone for panel performance measurements. The original output is pretty much identical to a sheet we currently have in our RedJade output file. And this sheet is called the attributes detail page. And there it is, almost to the very end, because this is where all the detail is. So this is our analysis of variance. And that's the workhorse for determining whether those differences in products are a statistically significant occurrence. We use additional metrics to help guide us about how individual subjects contribute to that final panel decision. What's in this sheet is summarized for us in the beginning sheets, but we summarize product results, we summarize attribute results, and we summarize the panel results all the way down to the individual subjects. I highly recommend that you spend time in this particular sheet. It is the analysis, and for those of us who are data-driven, we love it. Okay, so let's begin by kind of working through each of these sheets. I won't do all of them. I've highlighted the ones that I want to talk about the most, just because I could spend 2-3 days going through this, and we don't really have that time. It's just to give you some insight into where to look and what's important. So our cover sheet is the first one that gives us an overview of what our data was that we input, and to make sure that we know what it is and what we expect it to be, in particular the scale. If you're using a 100-point scale versus a 60, make sure that if you're flipping back and forth or constant, that's very important. Your repetition count is also very important. As Steve mentioned, the full RedJade output is really most beneficial when you have the repetitions of at least one additional evaluation, so that you can test the performance of the panelists. So repetition is very important. Number of products, make sure the number of subjects and the number of attributes.
Heather, can I say a second here though?
Yes.
So repetition, we talk about rep, but it's not just to measure the panel difference, but it's also to get more product through. I mean, product varies, and so how do you get more product through? So I think repetition, replication is really essential part of, I think, having robust descriptive data. And two, you always shy away from two. You kind of like at least three. Two, the data will run, but three is better, I think, right?
Absolutely. Very good point. Thanks. The next sheet is our analysis summary. And remember the analysis of variance that we had in the detailed attributes page. That has the probability levels for determining significance for products across each of the attributes. So this particular set of data right here is very important, and it's really the foundation of determining whether or not the products are different for each of the attributes. The probability levels are the values from the analysis of variance that test the product effect, but we also test an interaction effect where we're testing the subject by product interaction to say, do the subjects contribute to that decision-making of product differences? That's one of the key features of QDA, is that we want to understand the effect of the subjects when we determine product differences. And this additional statistics that tests the interaction will tell us whether or not subjects across products are doing something different. Do they disagree? Do they use a different magnitude? There's a lot of values that really determine whether or not that is an interaction effect. And this is sometimes significant, often significant, and sometimes not at all significant. But in this case, for orange color appearance, we do have a significant effect. So before we can determine whether products are different, we want to take into account that interaction effect. If it is significant, we want to do a new test of the product differences in our analysis of variance to determine whether that is too much variance across the subject and we lose the significance across the products. So we redo the test and we run the product effect with error being our interaction effect. Is product now significant using interaction as our error term? So that's kind of very statistically oriented, but these columns are how we work through decision-making of significance. So if product is significant, we want to test, is interaction significant? If it is, then we retest the product effect using the interaction as our error term. Do we still maintain a significant effect? So the probability levels of 0.05 or less indicate a 95% confidence level. So the lower the number is on the screen, the more significant it is. So here we're highly significant. The computer is telling you which statistical value it's choosing as a final result, and it's highlighted in blue. If it is the main product effect because of borderline interaction or significance level 0.07 instead of a 0.05, it's going to highlight that and give us a verify. We're very close to significance, so you may need to go and to verify that you still believe that carbonated appearance is not a significant effect. It's very close, and so therefore the computer gives you the note to go verify it. In a situation where there's no significant difference, for example, other citrus aroma, it's not even close to a 0.05, so it's not significant. You do not have to go and now test the interaction effect. It is significant, but at this point it really doesn't matter because 0.32 is not a significant effect. Grapefruit flavor is one of those unique situations where we have a main effective product being different, but the interaction is also significant. When we retest the product effect, we lose the significance. We are no longer close to the 0.05 value. So therefore, we're not significant, and the reason is there's an interaction effect. This is one of those attributes that you should go into the attribute details page and fully understand what happened with this attribute. Why did we lose significance? Was it the subjects contributing to crossover where they disagree about rank order, or perhaps magnitude where they're just not agreeing about the intensity of the grapefruit flavor, and therefore we're losing significance because of that disagreement across the panel. All of this is done for every single attribute, and a very important basis of the statistics that we're going to move forward through to look for panel performance issues as well. This is our panel summary sheet that gives us an overview of what our panel has done for this project. It gives us some overview information up here. It identifies any person, panelist, who needs to have some training based on their statistics of panel performance measurements. They're very highly interactive in terms of their performance, and so they get placed there if all the values meet the criteria of training for highly recommended. We only have one person, Norma, who needs to review her panel performance for standard deviation. So that's really where her results are popping up as being different from the panel and something that you want to take a look at. The attribute summary lists all those attributes on the previous page where we lost significance due to interaction. This is an important list that if you were to move from this page, I would be going and making sure that I understood grapefruit flavor, ginger flavor, etc. in terms of their interaction. Why did we lose product differences, and do we still agree that we lost the product differences and want to report that out? This column would have had an attribute that's being a non-use. For example, if ginger flavor was an attribute that nobody on the panel was really using for this set of 5 products, they were near the little hash mark on the line scale or below, then they would end up as a non-use attributes, just really does not apply to this product set. And the verify is that they're very close to significant, so we want to take a look at carbonated appearance and tart aftertaste. We might need to report them as a trend. They didn't meet the 95% confidence level, but we want to see if we would report them at a 90% or even an 85. And then this is a calculation where subjects have a great influence on the decision of differences across the products for this attribute. For example, stone fruit aroma. There is at least one person who has some level of influence in changing that probability level to a great degree and is affecting the final decision about its differences, the probability level. So this would be an important attribute to understand as well.
Heather, about that calculation though, talk about how difficult that before we had RedJade and really an automated way to do that, that was almost an impossible calculation to get, wasn't it?
Absolutely, that's a very good point. That what the computer is able to do, yay, which we had to do by hand, was one at a time, take a subject out, rerun the results, and look at the probability levels. Store those probability levels, go back to the data, remove another person, but put back the one you just took out, and you go through that process. And so you had 11 subjects, you had to do it 11 times, you had to look across 11 probability level columns to really make some determination of how did that individual affect my decision making. And the computer and RedJade has developed this as it's already done for you, so you can have it all nice and neat packaged, and a great time saver.
And nobody would do that. I mean, it was just impossible to do. And I mean,
no,
going through the output is hard enough, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was a huge improvement for sure.
Yes, and one that I use quite often because it is an important statistic that helps you say, well, how much influence did that subject have, and for which attributes do I really need to look at for the future? And when I reconvene the panel, what do I need to talk about to understand that attribute to a greater degree? And why would somebody have so much effect on the probability level changing? So, good points. The panel metrics summary is our summary table of all our important panel performance measurements. We have all of our subjects listed so we can look at them individually and the panel average. We have 6 specific panel performance measurements that are very important to look at, and we ordered them in a sequence that we believe is the most important to the least important. I'll of course, everything's important, but being able to order them, because we had to put the boxes somewhere, we ordered them what we think is most important. Standard deviation is our number one. So because we have replication, we can test standard deviation across a subject. How replicatable are they across their replications for each attribute across each product? And so the more variable they are, the higher their standard deviation is. And we want to look for across all the attributes, how often are they crossing over? Or I mean, have a standard deviation that is very high for each of the attributes. How many times does that happen? Well, Norma was one that we saw pop up in our summary sheet that said she needs to have some lookout on her standard deviation. We're indicating that we need to monitor her performance because she has a very high percentage of the time, she has a very high standard deviation. So she's much more variable in her response patterns across those replications. Crossover is another very important measurement, and crossover is looking at the rank order for a subject. Now this is by attribute, so for every attribute we're looking at their rank order of the 5 products, and how does that rank order compare to the panel's rank order. And we won't penalize if the panel doesn't think there's a difference within that rank order. So the brackets are the same, not statistically significant means. We're not going to penalize them, but we will calculate a score that says across differences in the products, how much do they agree with the rank order. It's a kind of a complicated equation when you have lots of products, but when you have only 2 and they're significantly different, so A is higher than the B by the panel, and a subject says, nope, B is higher than A, they've got a 100 crossover score. They exactly did something opposite from the panel. That's the easiest, most simple way to view crossover scores. It gets much more complicated as the number of products increases and as the brackets increase. But for Calvin, 48% of the attributes, he had a pretty high crossover score. So we want to look at how he is contributing to our final product decisions. How much is he contributing to that change in decision or not? Range, scale range, that is how much of the range of the scale are they using? Is it a large range or is it a small range? Discrimination, do they find differences across the products at a probability level that we predetermine? And if that probability level is high, then or significant, then we would count them as a discriminator. But if it's very low and they're not discriminating, we want to know how many times that is. So we've got Joseph and Ted that we need to monitor their performance. I will say at these 30s and 37, they don't stand out to me because I'm looking at the comparative nature as well. They're pretty close to other people of 23. So that's just a side note, but it is the computer popping them up as they're having a high percentage as compared to the panel. Scale position, that's the location on the scale, the average of where they're scoring. Do they tend to score very low on the scale, or do they tend to score very high on the scale? Here, everybody's well performing, so we don't have any issues there. And this is back to our attribute decision influence we saw on the previous page, where if they have a change in the probability level because of them being included or excluded, they will have a mark of influence. And how many attributes does that occur for? Well, we've got Norma. She's got some considerable influence. That 6 is a high number. You don't often see 6s. You often see 1s, 2s, and 3s. A 6 is something that I would definitely say, Norma, what's going on? We want to find out what you've got going there with that decision. It may not be that we're making big decisions about product differences, but we need to understand she's got some poor standard deviation in addition. So is she changing our product decisions or not? That's something we would definitely explore and want to understand. Attribute judgments page is a great little tool that we included to say, what are you going to do when you reconvene the panel? The panel leader can take this page and understand each and every attribute and remind them what happened with the last study and identify where there might be some issues and going forward. All of these columns have reason or values that will occur if it happens. For example, here, the p-value, 73% of the subjects have a p-value greater than 0.5, so not at all significant. So they're really not finding differences for other fruit aroma. If you had expected other fruit aroma to be different across these products, this is an attribute you would discuss in the reconvening of the panel. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. The correlations table is just the correlations across the means for each of the products. The subjects correlations are Calvin's means for orange color appearance. How does Calvin's means correlate to the panel means? They don't. Helena, hers did. So her rank order is very similar to the panel's rank order. She has a high correlation coefficient. Means table, very important page for reporting to show where those significant differences occur. You can choose your post hoc method. Duncan's is a great one. We have the A's and the B's and the C's saying A is significantly different than the B's is significantly different than the C's. And different ways to plot out, or not plot out, but present the means. We've got the product PCA and the attribute PCA. Great way to look at where those products and what is the intensity or the relationship of each of the products to the attributes. It's a visual display of the dimensions, underlying dimensions within the data. It's a very useful tool for QDA. So I highly recommend understanding PCAs if you don't, but also very cautious note is that the visual display should only be representative of what you already know about the data. So if it doesn't look right, then that's not, it's a visual display and it can be more confusing than it actually is helpful.
So Heather, let me just
Yes.
add to that really quickly. So a couple things. One is, for example, this is just factor 1 versus 2. I think this data set had 5 or 6 factors,
Yes.
is one thing. 2, you'll see that it shows the factors that Heather chose to look at in RedJade. So Heather looked at factor 1 versus 2, factor 1 versus 3, and factor 2 versus 3 in RedJade. Whatever factors you look at in the RedJade application automatically become part of the output in the system. Factor 1 and 2 are always included, but whatever factor and changes you make in the system automatically output to Excel.
Great, thanks for that, Steve.
Yep.
And also, if you were to remove a product or remove some attributes for the PCA visual, it will also do another page for the attribute PCA so that you can see, for example, if you remove non-significant attributes and reran it, it would also give you that. Performance tally, the next few sheets are really the details of our important panel performance measurements. And they get very detailed, as I said, and we're moving to the right, so we're getting more detailed. And the information here is very specific to computer set criteria. Calvin and all of the panelists, we can look at how many times, how many attributes did they have a highly significant effect. And the p-value of a 0.25, you might say, well, that's not the 95% confidence. No, we're going to be more lenient on probability levels with subjects. They are more variable. That's just how it is. We're going to say if your probability level is below a 0.25, we're going to consider that a significant effect. So there were 16 attributes for Calvin, 30 for Jamie, and 19 for Ted. Then there's the borderline attributes between the 0.25 and the 0.5, and then there are those that there's no significant difference at all, probability of chance, really. So Joseph had 11, but not really anything that's standing out, but that's where the percentages are coming from that we saw in the previous summary pages, where Ted and Joseph had the highest percentages of non-significance. The same thing can be done for the interaction effect. So that is, how are they different Then the panel as a whole, are they contributing to that interaction calculation and the analysis of variance? And to what degree? We're going to be more tight on that, back to the 95 and the 0.05 to the 5, and then anything above that. So we can look there. Lots of detail, but here it is. So when you had the issue with Joseph, you come to here and you can see the exact number and help you determine more detail. Subject discrimination, we saw that, oh, these are the probability levels that represent what we were just looking at. It's very interesting to look at this. So Calvin has the probability levels highly significant for many attributes. And what I like to look at is, we think that these are highly significant. Well, look, the whole panel thinks this is highly significant. Obviously, appearances, if there are big differences, we expect that, but it's a confirmation of that information. We also can see that other fruit aroma is not significant. We'll look across the row, pretty much everybody also agrees, highlighted in red in particular, greater than the 0.5, that this is not a significant difference across these 5 products. So a nice way to look at all probability values in one table. Crossover scores, this we talked about earlier of what is a crossover. You can have 100, for example, but the higher the number, the more crossover effect. The attributes that are listed here is not all attributes, only those that have a significant effect. We're not going to penalize anybody if there's a non-significant effect. So grapefruit aroma had the highest, and who contributed to that crossover effect? Grapefruit aroma in particular, Joseph did not agree with the rank order as compared to the panel for grapefruit aroma. Looking at your averages up here, that's where Calvin came in. He was a crossover person. And the standard deviation, one of our key, number one anyway, of looking for panel performance measurements. Norma was a little bit high, but in particular, I looked at her values. The 10s and the 12s and the 14s, yes, they're high and definitely higher than others, but not huge. You can see very high values here sometimes. So Norma, even though she has some high standard deviation, the 10s are higher than expected, but not huge. So when you do see things higher than that, really take note to that standard deviation. How are they using the scale? Are they just not consistent at all? Or is their scale usage so large that they tend to be more deviant anyway because their scale usage is very large?
Well, and one of the other points here too is, it's very easy to blame the panelists and say, oh, they're not picking it up, they're not doing it, but it's also very dependent on the product set that you're looking at, right? So there's balancing all of the different inputs that you know about, but this is certainly a big clue to start looking.
And that's a perfect example of where the products themselves were variable. We found that where our standard deviations were near 20, and we didn't quite understand the panel performance of deviation around a 20. And so we looked deeper and found that it was the products that were variable, not the panelists that were variable. So knowing that as well. Mean scale position, we talked about that earlier. Where on the scale are they? These are a lot of numbers that help us see where are the subjects in relation to the panel, what is their value, and the scale range is a similar calculation. But what I like and presented here are the bubble graphs that represent that exact data. Very visual information that's summarized up here in number form is presented in plot form here. There's a lot of information that I could spend quite a bit of time, but I see that we're moving very quickly. But a huge important page that I like to point out, because it does get kind of lost in the middle if you don't walk through the progression as I've described. So again, remembering that I'm recommending you move through your sheets like this, and that you do get to this spot in your output file to take a look. And the information is very valuable in determining where our subjects. I wanted to point out Calvin in particular. We were interested in his crossover and that he had some remedial training recommended. Well, each of these sheets tells us about the overall performance of each subject. And all the information, here's our main set of panel performance measurements and how did they do, and you can see all in one spot. So if you know that he's got some crossover, we can come here and look at it, maybe look across the puckering. He's got crossover, but he's not finding a difference at all. Why is he not finding the difference? Looking here to help you with understanding his overall performance.
Hey, Heather, I would say don't worry about hurrying too much. If we go over, we go over, and people can drop off if they need to, since we'll be posting it online anyway. So I wouldn't worry too much about the time. All right. People can drop off if needed, and we're recording it. So feel
perfect. Okay.
Yep.
So those are the sheets for each of the subjects, and we're going to end on the attribute details page because we're back to where all the data comes from. We have by attribute a full set of information. This is also included in the RedJade program while you're looking at it in the program on the screen, but it's here as well. So as you identify early on in the output file that you need to come look in more detail, then you can come here and really dig in to the data. Lots of information here that I could spend hours walking through each one and each value and how important each one is. But in particular, I want to point out that we can look at this table for orange color appearance and look at Calvin and each one of these people, what were their averages for each of the products. A ton of information can be found here. By subject, we can calculate their probability level, their interaction, their crossover score, and their range. Huge set of information right there in that table. It's on the screen in RedJade as well, but it's printed in this attribute details page where you can jump to it from one of your earlier screens that we went through and say, I need to dig deeper into understanding. So that is the output in a very quick way, but it's very important that you really get a solid understanding of those product and attribute and panel performance results. But sometimes it's like, well, now what do? I just went through all that. What's my next step? Well, in general, if the panel is performing well, you report your results showing those product differences across the attributes as defined by RedJade. So that one of those earlier tables that we looked at with the probability levels. And then use the significant brackets that we looked at in the means tables from whatever post hoc test you chose. If there are challenges with the attributes, then we reconvene the panel and plan on some specific work using the products that best demonstrate those sensory differences. And then make sure you have a clear discussion and the decision is made among the group about the definition and about the direction of the scale, just making sure that's very well defined. If there's challenges with the subjects, then we need to determine the extent of those issues. Remember that we don't want to selectively report. So we don't just say, Calvin, you weren't quite right, so I pull you out, you're out. No, we don't want to do that. We want every subject contributes. Some of the issues are more influential in our product decision process, and they will affect how you determine what panel training is in your follow-up. In addition to looking at all this information of the panel performance for each study, then the panel can be tracked over time to look at the consistent performance issues that might require more in-depth review. So I think, Steve, you can get to the screen that shows the panel performance, and then I have to stop sharing, right?
Yeah, just 1 second. I also wanted to point out on Heather's screen right now, it says all samples. Right, that all samples tab pulls all of the plots that you create in RedJade automatically. So that very last tab are the plots. Those are Microsoft graphs. They can be changed, transformed plots, font color, font size, etc. For putting in whatever reporting format that you want as well. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to share my screen. Let's go ahead and share my desktop. So what you'll see here, you guys can see the design block, right?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right. So a couple of things. This is what Heather was talking about with respect to the panel performance metrics over time. And Heather, is there anything that you specifically wanted to point out here? I only pulled in that one test so that they
Yes.
match.
So the measurements that we talked about with standard deviation, crossover, scale range, et cetera, that's all here summarized for your subjects across the studies. If you had multiple studies, then they would appear on that left-hand side there, and you can click them on and off. So if you had 2 studies, then it would combine that information and provide you standard deviation results for each person across those studies. So if they were consistently having standard deviation issues, you could see that and it would pop up. And if you want to scroll down, Steve, and just kind of give them a view of, there's that graph that we saw that I was telling you about, the bubble graph and the data that supports that bubble graph. And this is the mean position, scale mean position, and the scale range. So all the same information we were looking at earlier. And if you had multiple studies, then it would be new. It would look a little different. And Steve's clicking on them to show, to highlight who we want to look at.
Yeah, Norma was the one Heather was pointing out in the Excel data set. So you can click on Norma and see how Norma is doing overall on all of the panel performance metrics.
Perfect.
Which this is a powerful tool. I mean, this is something that, you know, I hadn't seen. I think we really worked on this quite a bit. To, you know, we always get these questions over time. Most companies have panels that they use on multiple product categories over time, and this summarizes in a big way. You know, if you have a problem subject and you've seen it on multiple studies, then this is another way to just delve into it and figure out how are you going to deal with that. Is it a changing your decisions, or, you know, what decisions does the sensory team need to make based on that data?
And then just to reiterate what Heather was saying, so here's the data in RedJade, right? Here's the plots. Here's the PCA plots where I was mentioning whatever PCA plot combinations you look at. This is factor 1 versus 3, but if I look at 1 versus 4, that will show up in the data set. Here's the individual subject charts that show the panel performance metrics across the different panel performance metrics that we look at in RedJade on an individual attribute basis. Then the one Heather mentioned last, which was attribute details, is here, and this shows all of those different plots by attribute, and you can change the attribute here. Okay. The other thing Heather mentioned while she was talking is the support document. So if I just go to the support channel, which I can click on, sorry, I'll show you where I can click on the question mark, visit the support site. If you go into support and you scroll way down to the bottom, I'm just going to quick scroll so you guys don't have to watch me scroll. But here's in analyses, here's the descriptive analyses. Talks about RedJade's descriptive analysis Excel output. This is just a quick 1 or 2 sentences about each of the sheets in the Excel output so that you can just know where to find the data that Heather was summarizing a minute ago. And then here's that RedJade panel performance metrics document that she was talking about as well. Heather, we had a question from somebody. Do you mind answering a question here?
Absolutely, no problem.
Okay, so if the question is, if we find standard deviation to be a real problem with a particular panelist, what is the suggested remedy or training?
Standard deviation is important for figuring out, are they finding differences, or are they just variable naturally? So I would want to understand what attributes they have the high standard deviation on. Are they the same attributes that they have this high scale range on? Is it a low scale range? Are they losing significance because their standard deviation is so high? All of that needs to be considered. If that standard deviation is representative of just the scale usage and how they scale, but they're contributing to the panel and the panel decisions, and they tend to be in agreement as a whole, then there's really, you don't modify their behavior. That is their behavior. That's how they're going to score. The minute you start modifying, it's going to backfire on you. If there is variance because they don't know what they're doing, they're having trouble identifying sensory perceptions, they don't have confidence where to score on the scale, that pretty much gets determined during those language training sessions where you can watch the subject, have call on them to discuss and really see how they're responding. Look at their response patterns during language development. If they just don't have the confidence, they're constantly affecting your final product decisions or panel results, then that's a consideration of really, do they belong on the panel? But that should be over time, you make that decision that they don't belong. And that doesn't often happen.
And you can also sorry, one more thing for Heather's note. You can also see what happens if you exclude that panelist in the data set by clicking the participant and then excluding the panel and seeing what the differences are among the panel. That data is not deleted. They're just excluded from the data set. So, okay, just to add to that. And then Becky, I'm sorry I interrupted you. Please go ahead.
No, I mean, I think there are lots of things we want to comment about too. And one of them, you know, we really do embrace the individual variability of subjects that, you know, you don't have to be like me and vice versa, but, you know, you need to be screened and qualified to be on the panel. And then you need to be able to replicate yourself. And that's why it's so important to have those replications to say, once you're on the panel, you know, are you consistently providing good information? And so we have all sorts of diagnostics to deal with that. And so we really embrace the individual variability to a point, but they still need to act as a group and not the interaction things that we talked about or you know, all those diagnostics are really what we want to understand.
Any other questions? Yeah. Feel free to ping another question. We'll stay on here for another couple of minutes. I realize that we went over the 45 minutes, but I think that the vast majority of people stayed on and were probably very interested in the information that Heather was offering here. We will post this to the support channel in the next half hour, 45 minutes. So it will be there as well. Again, if you have trouble getting to YouTube, just ping me or ping support and I can send you a Dropbox link and you can download the video and watch it on your own computer as well. But I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to unmute everybody, which I don't think is a great idea, but I'm going to try it anyway. If anybody has any questions, please feel free. If not, that was the presentation. We really appreciate your time, especially Becky and Heather. Thank you guys so much for sitting in and providing some additional color around RedJade's output. I think that a lot of people on this call are using descriptive analysis regularly, and being able to provide some additional color around here is great.
And that's your storytelling thing. And there are a whole bunch of tips and tricks on how to really tell that story. We've seen so many plots that are just jig-jaggedy and it's very difficult for the reader to view. And there are tools in RedJade to smooth out those plots to really help you tell that story to the, you know, not to the sensory team, but to the product developers or whoever else needs to gather that. And you know, you're not going to learn how to use this in a 30-minute session. I mean, if you have questions, definitely, you know, reach out to Heather. She's got a lot of details, and I think you have to look at your own data as you sort through that. So, you know, look out to ask us any questions. Certainly, we're here to help make this tool very usable for everyone.
And just for what Becky was mentioning, you'll see if you click on the cogwheel here and then analysis settings and then charting, you can smooth the chart data or you can keep it in the order they're evaluated. You can use the largest mean, you can go per chart largest mean, or you can use the entire scale value. So you have options around the charting that you can change here as well. Okay. Awesome, thank you guys very much for your time. I know it was a longer one today. I'm gonna go ahead and unmute everybody. I'm gonna stop recording first because it gets a little wild sometimes. But let's go ahead. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. You can also reach out. Becky and Heather, their website is dragonflysci.net, right, Becky?
.net. Yep, dragonflysci.net. Yep.
Dragonflysci.net. So dragonflysci.net. You can reach out to them. You can reach out to me if you have any questions as well. We're happy to help out. So thanks again, and we'll see you guys, many of you, on Thursday for the meeting as well. So I'm going to unmute everybody. Feel free to ask a question if you want to. I know nobody does once I unmute everybody, but I'll do it anyway. All right, here we go. Bye, everybody. Thank you for your time. All right, everybody's unmuted. Anybody have any other questions? Feel free to ask.
I have one question. So you talked about the interaction is when panelists behave differently from a group of panelists.
Just one second. Is that you, Thibault? I'm gonna mute somebody else who's causing feedback. Just a second. Okay, Thibault, now do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, yeah. We talked earlier about the interaction, you know, and if we have a significant interaction, it goes to, if we have a significant interaction, we take into account into our, to know if our products are different. The interaction, what is going inside the interaction? I just want to be sure. When I go through the data, when I look, it's not standard deviation, it's a crossover and also a range of the mean, because that means I've done it differently. Is it something else going in?
It's mostly that. So it's just the statistical effect of having a lot of variances occurring across the subjects, across the products. So it's the analysis of variance statistical test that tests the interaction of the subjects by the samples. So that value that's in there is summing the squares and squaring the sums and doing all the calculations to get the F ratio of that interaction effect. So our subjects there's just variance across the samples across the subjects. And so we tend to find that it's that crossover or it's the magnitude that's really affecting the interaction. It's going to be most sensitive to magnitude, but the crossover scores also, that's why when we look at the individual subjects and we look at their interaction, that's when they're most related to the magnitude, and that's why we do the additional crossover score. So in combination, all that data will help you determine where is that interaction effect coming into play and why do I need to include it in my new calculation, not the original product effect, but now the product effect with interaction included. So all that supporting data.
Okay, but and how do you do? Sorry, I'm hijacking a bit the conversation. But how do you do when, for example, my interaction is significant because someone used a mean range really bigger? So it's an interaction, and after I don't know, I lose the interaction when we go to the right, when it's prod versus interaction. How does it work? Because when I go to my data, I'm like, okay, my interaction comes from this guy or from those 2 or 3 guys that are using the scale differently, but actually they still rank it the same way and so on.
Yes, so I would be looking to make sure that you didn't lose the statistical effect across the products because of those 2 people. But oftentimes, if it's just magnitude, it does not create a new significance and loss of interaction. It was just the magnitude, and they're using the rank order similarly. You don't lose significance. You maintain a highly significant effect, even though you include interaction in your error term. So those 2, if they're crossing over, though, that's when you tend to find that you've lost your interaction or your statistical effect of product differences.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Any other questions? All right. Thanks again. Stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully we can all get back to work here pretty quick. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.